love to spend money on like putting people on death row, but we don't like to spend money on, when we make a mistake, we don't want to spend any money on making them whole.
Right. That's, to me, that is the craziest argument against the death penalty, is how often it's fucked up. Like how many mistakes are made and how many people are wrongly convicted of those crimes. And when it comes to like state prosecutors or federal prosecutors on these cases, do you think there's a problem with confirmation bias with those people and them not wanting to actually be objective and inspect all the evidence? And like, when you think about something and you have a theory, you have a hypothesis, the way to make it stronger is to test it against other things and try to prove it wrong. Mm-hmm. Try to prove it wrong as many possible ways as you can, the scientific method. And if you can't prove it wrong, it becomes stronger. Do you feel like these prosecutors aren't operating that way? They kind of get an idea in their head in the beginning and they do everything they can to prove that idea right, or to prove that argument right, no matter what it is.
I think most prosecutors are good prosecutors. They have good intentions, and they work hard towards their goal of seeking justice. But we're humans, and we make mistakes. And sometimes when we have a strongly held belief that someone is guilty, we sometimes have a hard time seeing other alternatives, right? So, it's I think we talked about a case that I had in federal court where my client was found not guilty of murder. It was a big multi-defendant case, drug conspiracy, and multiple murder charges. So my client was charged with murder. He was found not guilty of the murder.
Which case was this?
His name was Corey Harris, United States versus Corey Harris. So
I think I remember that one.
Well, so basically he's found not guilty of murder, right?
Right.
And he's found not guilty of the RICO conspiracy.
Okay.
And he also had a drug conspiracy charge. And as charged, he would have had a mandatory life sentence if he was convicted. But there are lesser included drug conspiracies. And so the jury found him guilty of the least amount of drugs, so that he had no minimum mandatory sentences, right? So basically, he was held responsible for a small amount of drugs. The judge ended up sentencing him to 120 years for basically a nonviolent drug offense, right? And the reason is the judge believed that he was involved in the murder, right? Despite the fact that the evidence was overwhelming that he was not involved in the murder, and despite the fact that the jury agreed that the evidence did not support him being involved in the murder. Fortunately, it was appealed. We won the appeal, and we recently went back, and he was resentenced to 11 years, 3 months.
Whoa.
But my point is that in that particular case, so a murder takes place in Manatee County. My client had been in Manatee County earlier that day. And we knew that because there was evidence of him driving through the toll booth of the Skyway. And there was the toll booth photo, which, you couldn't really identify him, but the car tag matched the car that he had rented. It was him driving his car down there. The other thing that they had is they had his cell phone pinging on cell phone towers in Manatee County earlier in the day, right? So that was the government's evidence connecting him to this murder. Plus there were other evidence, but that sort of brings him down in there. Okay.
So he was there. We know that
he was there earlier in the day.
Okay.
Early in the day. At the time of the murder, which is in the evening, my client's cell phone is being used and is pinging at the towers of his home. His home was in North St. Pete. So 30-minute drive away from the scene of the murder, right? The government basically, in my opinion, had blinders on in the sense that they refused to accept. They wanted to use the cell tower information earlier to prove that he was in Manatee County, but they refused the idea that the fact that he now is pinging in Pinellas County shows that he is, in fact, not part of this murder, right?
Right.
And so their theory was he drives down there, and there's nothing to support it, but and he gives someone else his phone, tells them to go to his house, use my phone at my house while this murder is taking place, which doesn't really make any sense, right? But do I think that any of the agents or the prosecutors did anything, with ill will or bad intentions? No, they did their job and they did what they thought was the right thing to do. But I think we all have a tendency to have blinders on. You watch a football.
Right, it's human.
Yeah, you watch a football game and if it's a close call, you're going to call it in favor of your team, right? Mm-hmm. That's just the way it is. And it's the same, I think, in the criminal justice system. It's prosecutors are supposed to seek justice, and as defense lawyers, we're supposed to fight for our clients' rights and to make sure that they get a fair trial and challenge the evidence, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a different standard. But it's an adversary system, and sometimes some prosecutors lose sight of that, right? But the great majority do not. The great majority of prosecutors are awesome. They're good people. They try to do the best they can, and I think the majority of cases where mistakes are made, it's not because the prosecutor didn't care. It's just because how they viewed the evidence and they sincerely believed that they had looked at everything and done everything right.
I had no idea that the judge could go against the jury.
Oh, I mean, so the judge in federal court, a judge can consider acquitted conduct as aggravation for sentencing purposes.
Consider acquitted conduct as aggravation?
Correct.
What does that even mean?
So that means that even though the jury said not guilty,
right,
and even though the court then has to recognize the jury verdict and adjudicate the person not guilty, the court can say, I still believe that he committed that crime, and therefore, and I believe that there is some evidence to support that, and therefore I'm going to sentence him harsher than I otherwise would. So the Supreme Court has recognized that that's lawful. But the analogy is that the acquitted conduct cannot be the tail wagging the dog.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So it cannot become the primary focus of the sentencing. And so the appellate court basically, in the oral argument, when we did the appeal, their question to the prosecutor who handled the appeal was, how is this case not the tail wagging the dog? How is 120 years for a small amount of drugs, how is that not the tail wagging the dog?
Right.
And that's why I got reversed, and now I got a just sentence.
Down to 11 years.
Yeah.